Hello and welcome to Timeless with Julie Hartman Live. It is Monday, November 18th, 2024. I'm Julie Hartman, and it is great, as always, to be with you. I'm sure many of you saw the Dennis and Julie episode yesterday that we premiered, sans Dennis, of course, -1 of Dennis and Julie. And I hope that you enjoyed that episode. And just to give a quick update on the prognosis of Dennis Prager, he does seem to be improving every day. But as I indicated yesterday, it will be a very long haul until he gets better. But I just wanted to say that at the outset because I've been getting so many emails and messages from many of you just asking for information. And again, I want to thank you so much for your continued prayers. Now, we have a very exciting episode today because we have an in-studio guest, and he is a rabbi. And those of you who've been watching me for some time, and certainly Dennis and Julie listeners, know that I'm very comfortable with rabbis because, among other things, I spend every Friday night, Shabbat, at the rabbi's home, who is a very dear friend of Dennis. And there are usually 2 to 3 rabbis there in addition to the one who is hosting. So as the Gentile, I've become very comfortable in their presence. And today, I'm so honored to welcome to the show Rabbi Raphael Shore. He is a Canadian-Israeli author, filmmaker, and rabbi, as I indicated. And he is the founder of Open Door Media, which is a Jewish educational organization. And he also founded the Clarion Project, which is a nonprofit organization, quote, dedicated to educating the public about the threats of Islamist extremism and providing a platform for moderate Muslim voices. He has several documentaries that he has produced over the years, including Obsession, Radical Islam's War Against the West, Relentless, The Struggle for Peace in the Middle East. And just this year, he was the producer of his newest documentary called Tragic Awakening, a new look at the oldest hatred. We have the trailer of that film, which I have watched. I was very privileged to get a sneak peek of it. Let's roll it.
I grew up in Lebanon and I hated the Jews. I was told that the Jews are evil, that they hate everybody and they would do anything to achieve their goals.
Disemboweled humans and raped women paraded around the streets while thousands cheer. Nothing has prepared any of us for this.
I'd never imagined seeing what we've witnessed after October 7th.
This was the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust.
We must normalize massacres as the status quo.
There are people openly celebrating mass murder.
History is made that day. Very proud of my people. Very, very proud.
They are not cheering for the liberation of the Palestinian people in Gaza. They are screaming, gas the Jews.
I would love it if they would do it again and again and again.
I don't understand anti-Semitism.
Anti-Semitism is not just a normal bigotry.
Where does this come from?
Why are the Jews always hated?
What's unique about anti-Semitism is that it is incredibly universal. It has longevity like no other hatred. And the intensity.
I found myself on a quest to try and understand anti-Semitism. The Jews are blamed for all ills of the world. Why?
Anti-Semitism requires a different type of explanation. When you see it so stark, you ask the question, so what is it?
On October 7th, the world was forced to make a choice.
When a society starts to indulge in this lurid, paranoid fantasy, every other hatred comes next.
You think it's an accident that Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, they hate Israel?
Every person has to choose a side.
Hitler somehow figured it out.
the rabbis of the Talmud and Adolf Hitler actually agree on the root cause of anti-Semitism.
So Hitler didn't want to kill the Jews because they were bad. He wanted to kill them because they were good.
Well, I see a quote up there from David Suissa, who is I call him my Rabbi. He's a member of.
Rabbi to have.
He is. He's another member of the Shabbat dinner crew. Well, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Julie.
And congratulations on this film and on all of your films and your work.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And we met just about 3 minutes before you came on the air, and you said, "Oh my gosh, we only have 2 minutes to get to know each other." And I said, "Well, we'll get to know each other on camera."
Perfect.
So tell me a bit about you. I know you grew up in Canada.
Correct.
And then you moved to Israel. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Bold move.
How did that happen?
Well, I grew up in a typical Jewish environment, which means not religious, kind of strong Jewish identity, but not really knowing much about it, getting a horrible Jewish education until my bar mitzvah. And
what's your parsha? Forgive me.
Parshat Emor, which didn't help.
Oh.
It's about the Kohanim and the temple service.
Yes.
Didn't help.
I'm a Gentile, but I have a great parsha. I want to brag to you,
What's
Rabbi,
yours?
about my parsha. It's Noah.
Yeah, you got
in
it.
Genesis.
You win.
If I could have handpicked my parsha, I would have picked the story of Noah.
And that's your personality. That's
Yes.
great. So mine didn't help. So when I was 13 and I graduated, got my bar mitzvah, graduated from Hebrew school, I was convinced Judaism doesn't make much sense and it's all irrational and irrelevant. And then at age 20, my twin brother ended up in yeshiva in Jerusalem. Stumbled upon it and ended up studying about Judaism. I thought, this is really strange. What's he doing there? It doesn't make any sense. I was at university getting a sophisticated education, and he was in yeshiva learning about Judaism. So I went to find out what he was doing and let him know that he's out of his mind. And in the process, I discovered that Judaism actually incredibly deep, incredibly sophisticated, and incredibly meaningful. And at that point, I got turned on not only to Judaism, but also to Israel. Soon as I graduated, one-way ticket. I moved to Israel, and that's where I've been in Jerusalem ever since, 40 years.
Do you live there now?
I do. I'm living in Jerusalem.
And what brings you to Los Angeles?
The new film and my book.
Wow.
I'm on a tour launching the book and the film.
Wow. So you've lived, you said, in Jerusalem for 40 years?
Correct.
Wow.
Correct.
I've only been to Israel once, but I am dying to go back to Jerusalem. It really is. You can very much, and by the way, when people would say this, I would respect their point of view, but I wouldn't relate to it, and I would think, okay, maybe they're imagining it or something, but you really do feel the presence of God.
You do.
In Jerusalem.
The spirituality there is thick.
And this is coming from someone, when I went, who was pretty secular. And that trip really transformed my life and certainly my faith.
That's beautiful.
Yes.
That's beautiful.
So, okay, so you moved to Jerusalem when you were 20 years old.
Yes.
Thought your twin brother was crazy, but then you ended up following.
Mm-hmm.
And what was it like then? I mean, you don't have to tell me what year it was unless you want to, but give me a sense of understanding of what it was like in Israel's history and what it was like to be there in your 20s.
It was wonderful because it was the 80s and it was simple. It was simple. And I remember when you wanted to get whole wheat bread, there was one to choose from in the country. And
why?
Only because it was a new country. It was only born in 1948. It was on austerity measures for most of the 50s and 60s. It was just starting to come into a robust economy. And then it was also very socialistic in the early days. So it took a while to get an economy going. Only wealthy people had private cars. They were called privates because it was only the wealthy people could afford a car. And so it was very simple. It was beautiful. Very few people had heating or air conditioning. And it was that simplicity was beautiful.
Did you feel
Down
safe?
to earth. Completely safe. When did it get really unsafe was after the peace process began. The peace process brought us terror and war. Oslo, starting in 1993. That's when it started to get really bad. There was bad times. There was always terror since Israel began. And even before Israel began in the 1920s, the Islamist world, the Arab world, was dedicated to preventing the Jewish people from establishing a state. So that's a 100-year war that's been going on, but it got particularly bad after the Oslo peace process, because then they got control of their own education system and they began to radicalize their population much more.
What precipitated the Oslo Accords in 1992?
Well, the left wing of Israel was desperate to become the heroes and create peace. And so they had a delusion that the other side wanted peace as desperately as the Jewish people wanted peace. And so they became very gullible, and they fell for Arafat telling them a few lines, the head of the Palestinians, the head of the PLO, Yasser Arafat, who was an arch-terrorist. They fell for him saying a few words of peace, even though in Arabic he was speaking a few words of war. But the Jewish leadership of Israel was really desperate to end the cycle of wars, because the Arab world had already started 3 or 4 wars at that time, and Jewish people love peace. So we wanted to believe that everybody wanted to have peace just like us. So it was a very delusional opportunity, and that was the beginning of my film career. My first film was called, as you said, Relentless, The Struggle for Peace in the Middle East, which was designed to expose the two-facedness of the Arab leadership, primarily under Arafat.
So what was the situation prior to 1992? Obviously, Gaza was not the Gaza as we know it today, since Hamas took over Gaza in 2007. Mm-hmm. What was the situation like with the Palestinian and the Arab population?
The situation was that the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, was primarily autonomous. You know, the Arab communities had autonomy, but it was under the Israeli military government, because after 1967 we won the war. There was a genocidal war against the Jewish people in 1967 and in 1973 against multiple Arab armies, and Israel, thank God, was victorious, and we recovered our ancient land of Judea and Samaria. So it was a situation, but Israel immediately said, we'll give it back to you. We'll give you Judea, Samaria, and Gaza in return for peace. And it was land for peace became the mantra. Even though it should have been peace for peace, it was land for peace, and it didn't work out.
So you mentioned that the Oslo Accords kicked off your first film. Mm-hmm. Tell me more about that film, and also your first piece of written work. What was that about?
Well, okay, one at a time. So the first film was an attempt to show the Jewish people and the world that we were being naive. Because at that time, when Oslo was kicked off, 80% of Jews in Israel, even in Israel and abroad, were supportive of the peace process and the Oslo deal that was being made. And I was one of a small group of people who said, hold on, these people are not talking peace. They don't really mean peace. They've been terrorists all their lives. And can we really afford to take the risk for peace? What was the risk? Giving them land that could then be used as a terror base, because they would have autonomy in that area. They could then educate their children to incitement and hatred against the Jewish people, and they could use the land as a base for terror. So then that was what people on the right, were saying, like myself, and people were saying, "Oh, come on, don't worry about it. You're being an alarmist." And we said, no, you got to listen to what Arafat is saying, what the Arab leadership are saying to their own people, not what they're broadcasting to CNN in English. And so we created the first film in order to expose that, and it was Relentless. And then afterwards, we made a film called Obsession, Radicalism's War Against the West, and that ended up being a huge hit. And 30 million DVDs were distributed all across America. So it's one of the biggest documentaries, I think, in American history, because it was the first one to expose the ideology of the radical Islamist threat. Following that, I said, okay, looks like we know how to make documentary films and educate people. I made another 8 films. One was on Iran called Iranian, one about protecting women's rights called Honor Diaries, and we've had a great run of it. I made a bunch of films, documentaries about Israel and showing a different side of Israel than most people see in the media. So 18 feature films. But now, a month ago, I produced my first book called Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Jew? Learning to Love the Lessons of Jew Hatred. And it's available on Amazon, and it accompanies the film that we just saw, the trailer.
Why do you think there's so much Jew hatred and an obsession with Israel?
Well, that's exactly what the film and the book are about. So it's difficult to consolidate it into one phrase or two, but I will attempt. First of all, I'll tell you what it's not. What it's not is what everybody thinks it is. And everybody's been kind of raised and educated. The conventional wisdom is it's just another form of racism, or it's the scapegoat theory. In other words, a society, when there's problems, they need to blame their problems on somebody, and the Jews are prominent or they're successful, and so the society needs to blame somebody. The Jews are easy targets because they're there and they're prominent. That's what we've been raised to believe. But the reason that's problematic as an explanation is because in every generation, in every society, there's a different explanation for why. And they all contradict each other. We're too rich. We're too poor in some societies. We assimilate too much. We don't assimilate enough. We're capitalists. We're communists. So it's never the same idea. In this generation, we're colonialist occupiers. It's just another excuse. And the question is, what's really bothering them? That's your question. What's really bothering them? And in the film and the book, I say, I'm not going to answer it for you. Let me bring the number one arch anti-Semite in history and let him answer it. And Adolf Hitler is presented to explain why Jews are hated. Why did Adolf Hitler carry out the worst genocide in human history? Why did he try to wipe out every single Jew? And he explains it very clearly. I'll tell you in a sec. But what's fascinating is, in his clear explanation, it ends up matching the Torah's explanation for why the Jews are hated. So Adolf Hitler and the Bible have the same explanation for why Jews are hated so much. Should I pause for breath or should I continue?
Maybe for dramatic effect, which you would know very well from being a filmmaker. We'll pause. And what is that reason?
Okay. Hitler explained in a very clear worldview throughout his writings and his speeches, from his first bit of writing in 1920 to his last political testament in 1945, that he was a rational anti-Semite. And his reason brought him to genocide. And he said the Jewish people have committed a terrible, terrible crime against humanity. And that crime is that we brought to the world humanitarianism. The concepts of love your neighbor, the concept of peace on earth and brotherhood of all mankind, the values of help the poor and help the weak. These ideas of humanitarianism were Jewish inventions, ethical monotheism, where the dignity of every human being, the sanctity of every human life. Adolf Hitler said the world has two possible worldviews that you can go in. One is that Jewish view, and the other one was what came from social Darwinism, which is the idea of might makes right. The idea that the humanity is part of the animal kingdom and it's survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest in the animal kingdom means you have a hierarchy, and the strongest are allowed to crush and conquer the weaker. So you don't help the poor. You don't help the weak. You don't support everyone to
sort
have a
of
brotherhood.
Nietzsche's Übermensch idea.
Exactly.
Yes.
I quote Nietzsche a lot in my book, because not to say he was necessarily a bad anti-Semite, but he also identified the Jews as the ones who were brought into the world this worldview, and he also considered it to be a tremendous crime. So Hitler was not unique. This was a German tradition that led to tremendous anti-Semitism. And Hitler said the Jews must be destroyed because humanitarianism needs to be destroyed for the sake of humanity's development.
To follow up on the Nietzsche reference, Nietzsche, which you can learn more about if you care to. I do a Thinker of the Month series with Spencer Clavin of the Claremont Institute, and he's spectacular. And we talked about Nietzsche, and he posits that Judeo-Christian values have contributed to the collapse of civilization or the decline of civilization, and he calls them a slave mentality.
That's right.
That you're essentially enslaved to someone else's morality. And he said that these ideas of equality should not be aspire to, because we're not equal in the eyes of Nietzsche. Some are smarter, some are more fit, some are stronger. And we, instead of trying to equalize the playing field, we should allow the stronger to triumph over the weaker. And then he also said that Christianity celebrates, I don't view it this way, but he said it celebrates weakness and suffering.
That's what Nietzsche
he said,
said,
what kind of religion would put God on a cross, you know, and so humiliate their God if they weren't trying to celebrate weakness? That's so interesting. And, you know, this is kind of a funny, I guess, funny or not so funny story, but I'm so interested in everything in life. And I wanted to read Mein Kampf. I was so afraid to order it on Amazon, though, because I'm like, I don't want the proceeds to go to, God forbid, something really bad.
Right.
And so for my birthday, one of my friends, we were out at a bar, and I had mentioned to him that I wanted to read it because I want to actually read the primary source and understand what this maniac was thinking. And we're at a bar, and he hands me a wrapped present, and I open the present, and it's the book in the bar, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, maybe you should have given this to me outside. This is not looking too good. But it's very, very important that we actually go to these sources and understand what they are saying. You know, I have a theory to run past you. I have a theory about modern day monomania with Israel, with all of, I mean, did you see on Netflix this new Mary film came out, the trailer? And there are many pro-Palestinian people who are outraged because Mother Mary is played by an Israeli. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, so many of these individuals will find something to be outraged about every single day. Here's my theory. I think in the United States, right now, it has a lot to do with the white versus non-white paradigm. Here we have all over the world. I mean, I was reporting on Haiti, how Haiti descended into gang violence, but nobody cares because it's black people killing other black people. China massacres the Uyghur Muslims. I mean, literally, you could go on and on about all of the strife around the world, and there is not attention given to it. But then when it's Israel, a white country, and I put that in quotation marks because, as you know, Israel's 50% non-white, oppressing a non-white country, I think that is what gets the attention because it can be spun for a political narrative.
100%. So let me just go back and then I'll tie it into that.
Sure.
So when Hitler identified Judaism and the Jewish people as the ones who were bringing in this ethical monotheism, the same thing that Nietzsche understood. In other words, the idea is that we imposed morality on the world, and that was what they were fighting against. The resistance against the Jewish people is a resistance against the morality system that we've brought into the world. For that reason, Hitler was going to destroy Christianity too. That's something that most people don't understand, but if you read Mein Kampf, you'll see it a little bit. If you read his table talk, you'll see it constantly. Christians were going to be destroyed. But he understood the Jews need to be wiped out one by one, every single Jew, because Hitler believed that it's in Jewish DNA. It's in our spiritual DNA to bring ethical monotheism into the world, whether we're educated or not. So every Jew had to die. So that's why I say in the book and in the movie, Hitler was not so crazy. He was evil, but he wasn't so crazy. And then running to modern day. So this battle of human history, of body and soul, it's really that fundamental conflict of, is humanity going to rise to become spiritual beings and conquer their own bodily animal instincts, or are they going to honor the animal instincts and become part of the animal kingdom? Might makes right, survival of the fittest. And that battle continues to this day. Radical Islam was Nazis' ally in World War II. The Mufti of Jerusalem spent World War II as a guest of Adolf Hitler in Berlin during World War II. Radical Islam became an unrepentant ally, and they've continued the fight for 100 years. But it's not just Jews against the radical Islamists today, it's against the whole world, this double standard that you're talking about. Why is it that everybody on the planet knows that there's 40,000 Palestinians that have been killed, but they have no idea how many Sudanese civilians have been killed or how many Ukrainian civilians have been killed? There's an obsession with the Jews, like you're pointing out. There's a deep, deep double standard. Why is it that refugees are allowed to escape war zone, which is according to international law in Ukraine, in Syria, by the millions. But when it comes to the Palestinian war, nobody takes Palestinians.
Well, here's the eerie irony about it, Rabbi. It's actually kind of white supremacist in a way, because what you're saying is that lives only matter if they are taken by white people.
Correct.
And I remember seeing, this is what made me conservative. During I was a liberal, believe it or not, in my heyday. And in 2020, one of the things that I thought was so morally abhorrent was that when black people were killed by other black people, I remember there was an 8-year-old girl who was killed in the Black Lives Matter riots.
Right.
Nobody cared. But then when a white person killed a black person, it got all of this media attention. I said, wait a minute, are you saying that black lives only matter if they're taken at the hands of white people? And that is what scaled upward is going on now, where there's this monomania with the war in Gaza, because again, I think that people are just so obsessed with this white versus non-white paradigm. And if only they realized the eerie kind of tinge of white supremacy that comes along with that.
Right. It's too bad they don't. But yet literally thousands are being killed every day in Sudan today, but they're black against black. And nobody cares. There's a slave trade in Africa. There's Arab slave trade.
Right, everybody cares about slavery,
blacks,
but
not this.
And everyone
one.
cares about women's rights, but in Iran, where a woman can be raped and by her husband, marital rape is legal, and if she is raped outside of marriage, she has to have 4 male Muslim witnesses to corroborate her story in court.
Well,
no one cares.
Yeah.
So I know that you've probably seen a lot in your filmmaking days.
Yes.
Is there any person or story or event that you covered that really stands out to you that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I would say that just the first thing that comes to mind is my hero in the last year, since October 7th, Douglas Murray, is such an incredible human being. I got to meet him a few months ago at the Republican Jewish Committee conference. And in my book, I talk about stories of spiritual and moral offensive responses to anti-Semitism and to hatred. And I bring the stories of several non-Jews, and one of them is Douglas Murray, because, here he is, a non-Jewish fellow who just says it like it is, and more brilliantly and beautifully than anyone else. And I just have such admiration for the courage of someone like that to go out and make a difference. And similarly, the other story that comes to mind is the lady that was featured, you saw in the trailer, Rowan, who grew up as a radicalized anti-Semite like the rest of her population in Lebanon. And she managed to get out of it and realize that she had been brainwashed to hate Jews, and that Jews really were not her enemy. And she was able to pull out of this indoctrination, and now she's speaking out on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people, and she's been in Israel 3 times in the last year. And I just love heroes like that. They're amazing. It shows the possibility of humanity to rise and get on the right side of history.
I'm just going to pause for a minute. Sorry. Oh God, we're live. I forgot that we weren't live. We're so used to pre-recording. No. We're not cutting it in half. Sorry, I have to communicate with my producer. Isn't that so funny that I felt so comfortable that I completely forgot that we're live? Sometimes there are these moments, behind the scenes moments that people capture. But hey, okay. I want to follow up on that, because I too am so encouraged by these stories of people who have had these transformations. Have they ever talked about threats to their safety? And similarly, have you experienced threats to your safety? I mean, I interviewed on this show, his name is escaping me, Robert Spencer. I remember now. Robert Spencer, who is, boy, is he brave.
Yes.
And he came onto the Zoom for this show, and he was in a dark room, and just his face was lit up. And our dear producers, spoke to him and said, could you move into a different spot? This is, not the most amenable look for a good interview. And he said, no. And they said, why? And he said, I don't want anybody to see anything in my home, including the shapes of my windows. He was poisoned in Iceland. He had ISIS try to take him out in Texas. And he is so afraid for his safety that, again, when he comes on the air, he cannot even show his background.
Wow.
Have you had, God forbid, any threats?
I have a great story on that. Once
Okay.
I was meeting with Frank Gaffney. Frank was one of the original people who are also trying to expose the threat of radical Islam. And he once asked me that exact same question. So Frank said, has your life been threatened? Is there a fatwa against you? This is after I did the first few films. And I said, no, I'm nervous and I have had some threats, but I don't have a fatwa against me. So he says with a straight face, I guess you're not working hard enough.
Ooh. Ooh.
Isn't that interesting?
That actually, you know what? That has a lot of credence to it, believe it or not.
Yes, I know. Sadly, it is. Ayan Hirsi Ali was
isn't she
another
incredible?
amazing lady. She was featured in our film Honor Diaries.
Yes.
And these women were out to help other women. And we had a situation where CARE, the Islamic Society that pretends they're for human rights but really are radical Islamists in disguise, the main Muslim organization in DC, they came out against the film Honor Diaries. And at the time, Megyn Kelly put the issue on her show on Fox at the time, and she brought on a CARE spokesperson. She said, what's wrong with this film? It seems to be all about, why are you coming out against this film, Honor Diaries? She said it's for helping women in the Muslim societies to have more rights. And
to come out against the film?
Yeah, CARE came out against the film very strongly, condemning the film. But it was all about increasing women's rights in the Muslim community. And it was all women like Ayan Hirsi Ali, who were brave Muslim women who were speaking out. So they asked the CARE spokesman, so what's wrong with the film? Is there some problem with the content? Do you have a problem with the... No problem with the content. Is there a problem with the spokespeople who are in the movie? People like Ayan Hirsi Ali? No. What's the problem? So then she said, what's the problem? And then she said, it's the people behind the film. So Megyn says, oh, you mean Jews? Ooh, on national TV. Ooh. She nailed CARE for being anti-Semites.
She's not one to let one like that go. Good for her. So what did the person say?
She was off the air the next night when CARE showed it. CARE showed up. They said enough with these women spokespeople. They brought back their veterans to do their lies and their two-faced conversation.
To what do you attribute the rise of radical Islamic terror?
The primary reason for it is because Islam has a side. We can be fair here and say Islam has a peaceful side, and we can say Islam has a radical side. And very often in human history, the radicalized side has been victorious. It's interesting to note, I mentioned before, Adolf Hitler wanted to destroy Judaism and Christianity. Why didn't he want to destroy Islam? Why were Islam's his allies during World War II? So again, I go back to the anti-Semite to answer the question. And Hitler believed that Islam was much more aligned with Nazism than it was to Christianity and Judaism, even though it's part of the Abrahamic faiths. So in other words, Hitler saw in Islam a dominating, imperialistic, chauvinistic system of thought that was much more aligned with his. And so in Islam, starting from Muhammad, was the desire to conquer the planet in the name of Islam. And they have continued that throughout history when they have the opportunity, through the Crusades. There was the fight against Christianity and Islam. So today, there are many people, that was the nature of the Islamic State, that Islam wants to see it become the number one religion. And that means destroy Christianity, destroy Judaism, and a totalitarianist Islamic state. That's what we're facing in a lot of Islamic thinkers. Now, could it be reformed? I have very good friends who are Islamic.
Me too.
And they want to see Islam reformed. They want to see the peaceful side of Islam be victorious. But right now they're losing. And whether it's even Saudi Arabia, Sunni, or Iranian Shiite extremism, they're different forms, but all of them united in this idea that Islam should dominate the world. Sadly, they've infiltrated the campuses in the United States of America, and they're pouring in hundreds of millions of dollars and even billions of dollars into the campuses to influence. All of this influences the campuses to become not only anti-Israel and anti-Jewish, but anti-American.
Is there anything that you wish Israel would do differently in this war?
Yes. I think that the head of the snake is Iran. first of all, I want to say that it's sad. The Jewish people, again, are treated with a double standard. I spoke in Colorado Springs to a group of non-Jews, and I said, if America had the proportional attack that Israel did on October 7th, how long would it take America to solve the problem? In other words, if 30,000 Californians were murdered and raped.
It's actually more, forgive me, like 45,000.
Okay, 45,000.
Yeah.
45,000 were murdered. Thousands were raped on October 7th by a Mexican terrorist group. And then it was continued with thousands upon thousands of missiles being rained down indiscriminately against the civilian population of New Mexico and California. How long would it take America to solve that problem? And I said to this group, I think it would be about a week. What do you think? And they all agreed with me. Of course, America would not put up with it. Israel's been facing this for over a year. The missiles are still flying. Why? So at this event in Colorado Springs, afterwards, somebody came up to me and says, I actually know the answer to that. The answer is it would take us 3 or 4 days because America has a principle of proportionality, they called in their military. We would have destroyed Mexico and nobody would have cared, and there would be no more missiles. And there would have been thousands upon thousands of civilian casualties, and nobody would have said a peep because they were defending themselves against this attack and against continued attacks. But when it comes to the Jews, we're not allowed to. The world doesn't allow us to defend ourselves. We get accused of genocide when we're conducting the most moral war against the most evil group on the planet today. And so this, I look at it as it's not just the Jews today against the Muslims, but it's the entire Western world that conspires and condemns us while we're trying to defend ourselves. And as a result, we're taking a year to do it. So I would prefer that we would be actually much stronger in our defense of ourselves and not risk our own children's lives because we are afraid to take out the hospital that they're hiding their entire military infrastructure. The soldiers in the Israeli army are incredible heroes, and they've discovered that in every single hospital, in every single school in Gaza, in almost every single residential building, in every single mosque is a military headquarters and a military base. And Israel's gone house by house, risking our own soldiers and doing a brilliant job. And yet we still get condemned as being genocidal baby killers. So we may as well just be a little stronger like every other non-Jewish nation would do. And finally, for the end of my long-winded answer to your short question, the head of the snake is Iran. And it is very upsetting when the current American administration tells us how and how not we can attack Iran after they send hundreds and hundreds of massive ballistic missiles to kill us.
And they give billions of dollars to Iran to boot.
Exactly, which allowed an October 7th to happen. And then they tell us what we can and cannot do to defend ourselves. So I'm praying every day that Israel will attack Iran much more strongly. I hope the Trump administration will allow us.
Do you think that would end well?
I think it will end incredibly well because I think it will free the Iranian people from the regime, the radical Islamist regime that started in 1979, that from what I understand still today is not popular, and the majority of Iranians would rather have a non-radical Islamist government
Bring
upon
back
them.
the Shah.
Yeah, the Shah was corrupt. I don't know if they want the Shah, but
Right.
they bring back a reasonable... I think that we need to free Gazans from the Palestinian Hamas. We need to let Palestinians live a normal life. We need to let Iranians live a normal life.
So sad.
And they are the ones who suffer, not just the Jews. They're the ones who are suffering from totalitarianist organizations and governments that are not allowing them to have civil rights. And again, like you said before, nobody cares. It's only when the Jews are forced to defend ourselves and then some of them die that the world starts to care. So it's a double standard that I find very upsetting.
On a final note, a year ago, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wrote a editorial for the Wall Street Journal where he outlined 3 mechanisms that needed to be in place in order for there to be recovery to the nation. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he referenced was essentially the denazification of Gaza. And you had mentioned the radicalization of the education system. And he compared the situation now to the situation after World War II, where through denazification efforts, they were able to reform Europe. And, you know, as much as one would hope that that could be achieved, we're in a very different situation now. I would argue, and I hope I'm wrong, a worse situation now. Because at the end of World War II, not only had Germany's allies been defeated, well, I suppose Germany was defeated before Japan, but you know, Italy had been toppled. Largely, there was massive public opinion against the war. Japan was still going, of course, but they were out there in the Pacific, and they would be defeated some months later. And largely, again, the kind of world public opinion was turning against the war. We're in a different situation now. We're not only do we have Hamas, not only do we have Hezbollah, well, a diminished Hezbollah, but there's the Iranian regime. Iraq is a proxy state of Iran. Of course, there's Afghanistan and the Taliban. There's Saudi Arabia, Turkey. I wrote an article in the American Mind about the radicalization of the Turkish population. And on top of that, just to, you know, make matters worse, is that half of the West now seems to hate Israel.
Right.
And so, forgive me if this is a bit grim, but where do you see this going in 20 to 30 years? What do you think Israel will look like?
Well, I think that it's a great question, and it's a difficult question. But I believe that today Israel is acting in defense of America. Israel is defending human rights and defending the American way of life, the Western way of life, Western values, against the greatest threat to it, which is what you just outlined, the radical Islamist threat, which is very wealthy and very profound and coming at us in many different directions. The fact that the world is inhibiting Israel from doing the job instead of praising Israel for doing the job is double-sided and very strange, because it's against America's best interest. So I'm hoping that many people will get on the right side of history. That is why I made this film, Tragic Awakening. That is why I wrote the book, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Jew? Because we need Jews to have the strength to stand up for being Jewish in the face of all of this negativity. And we need Americans to stand up and be on the right side of history, because there is this war going on that you're describing. This is a massive global war, and today Israel's on the front lines. But Israel is the little Satan in Islamic thought. The big Satan, the great Satan, is America. And this is something that all Americans should be concerned about and should be rooting for Israel in this war. And it's sad that they're not all. But I think there is hope. I remain hopeful for two reasons. Number one, because I'm a believing Jew and I read the Bible. And the plot line has been laid out, and it's clear where this is all going, and it's a happy ending. And the Jewish people have survived for 2,000 years in persecution and exile, but we're back in the land of Israel. The land of Israel is blossoming, and despite the fact that forces are trying to destroy us for the last 100 years, we've created a beautiful society of wonderful people who are family-oriented and have beautiful values, and we're going to just keep going. We're just going to keep living and being resilient and making the world a better place and spreading our light, whether the enemies like it or not. And we know it's going to have a happy ending. And the second reason is because the Palestinians, although they're 95% anti-Semitic today, according to the ADL, the most anti-Semitic population on the planet, if the Americans and the Europeans would say, we're giving you millions of dollars. For the last few decades, the Palestinians have received more money per capita than any other group on the planet. And it's going to continue. If they would just say, reform your education, teach your children about peace and love and accepting a Jewish state next door to you, I believe that we can change them. It's up to that's why I say it's not just about the Palestinians, not just about the radical Islamists, it's about the Americans and the Europeans getting on the right side of history. And if they would force a loving, peaceful education to go into the Palestinian and the Arab world, then it would just take a generation of re-education. In 25 years, we could have a beautiful world. And in a few years, we could free the Iranians from the radical Islamists and the Gazans from radical Islamists, and hopefully make the world better, not only for Jews and Americans, but also for the Arabs.
Well, thank you so much for coming on to the program today. I hope that you're right about that. And we'll certainly on this show try to do everything in our power to change people's minds and to make that happen.
Thank you.
And speaking of changing people's minds, please do check out Rabbi Shor's new film, which you saw the trailer of, Tragic Awakening, a new look at the oldest hatred. When do you go back to Israel?
I'm here for a month. I'm going.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to some film festivals, some conferences.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And anyone who wants the book, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Jews,
Yes.
available already on Amazon.
Well, thank you again. I look forward to reading it.
I appreciate being on the show, Julie.
And before we go, I want to tell you about something I know you've been wondering about, and that's MyPillow. Right now, you can get a standard MyPillow available for just $14.88. That's a savings that's too good to pass up, and there's a limit right now of 10 per customer. So don't wait to take advantage of this great offer with the promo code Hartman, spelled Hartman. And there's more. Right now, you can take home a 4-piece kitchen set for only $25. Enjoy their new mattress topper starting at just $99.99, or pick up the luxurious MyPillow bed sheets starting at $49.98. Just go to mypillow.com or call 1-800-566-6745 and use the promo code Hartman. Again, mypillow.com or 1-800-566-6745. Don't delay. Order today. Use my last name, Hartman, at checkout. I'll see you tomorrow, everyone. Please be well. And as always, you know you can email me at julie@julie-hartman.com. Take care.